Maraming salamat po to the Lyceum of the Philippines University Harmonic Chorale. Secretary, please call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senator Sangara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano, De Lima, Drilon, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Honasan, Monteveros, Lacson, Ligarda, Pacquiao, Pangilinan po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Subiri, Senate President Pimentel.
which is present. With 21 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journals of the 41st session, Monday, November 28, 2016, and the 42nd session, Tuesday, November 29, 2016, and consider the same as approved.
There is a motion to dispense with the reading of the journals of the 41st and 42nd sessions and consider this as approved. Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. We'd like to welcome some guests in the gallery. The Circle of Public Administration and Governance students from the Polytechnic University of the Philippines, Santa Mesa, Manila, Mr. President.
Welcome to our guests.
Mr. President, with the permission of the Chamber, instead of the reference of business right away, I move for the consideration for third reading of PS Resolution 241 under Committee Report Number 11.
Is there any objection to the motion? There being none, the motion is approved.
May we request the Secretary to read the title of the measure?
Resolution concurring in the ratification of the Articles of Agreement of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank.
Mr. President, printed copies of the measure were distributed last December 1, thereby complying with the 3-day rule. I therefore move to vote on third and final reading proposed Senate Resolution 241, resolution concurring in the ratification of the Articles of Agreement of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank.
Any objection to the motion? Okay, there being none, the motion is approved. And pursuant to Section 115, we shall have nominal voting for a resolution relative to treaties and international agreements.
Yes, Mr. President, may I ask Secretary for
Secretary,
a nominal
please.
vote?
Conduct the nominal voting.
Roll call of members, the Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano, De Lima, Trilon, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Honasan, Hontiveros, Lacson, Ligarda, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Soberi, Senate President Pimentel.
Can we get a clarification from Senator Subiri? Please, Secretariat is confused. What did you say? Yes. Yes, he said yes. Yes, narinig ko. Yes. So let me announce the result of the vote. 20 affirmative votes, 1 negative vote, no abstention. Hence, Senate Resolution number 241 under Committee Report number 11 is hereby approved on third and final reading.
Thank you. Mr. President, just for the record, when a member of the Senate does not say anything,
Yes.
tradition holds that he votes in favor. If you are voting against, you say so.
Yes, and for the record, when I announced the result, no one objected. So
Yes.
that result was accurate.
Thank you very much. Now, Senator Hontiveros wants to explain her vote.
Senator Ontiveros is recognized to explain her vote on Senate Resolution number 241.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I have refused to sign the resolution ratifying the Philippines' accession to the Articles of Agreement of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank.
Excuse Senator Ontiveros. May we ask our colleagues to please Madam, break up your meeting so that we can listen to the explanation of the vote of Senator Ontiveros. Sorry, Senator Ontiveros, but please continue.
Dagang salamat, Mr. President. I refuse to sign the resolution ratifying the Philippines' accession to the Articles of Agreement of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. This is because, before becoming a member of another international financial institution, we should put our house in order by verifying whether the loan agreements our country has entered into with these institutions are in accordance with the principles on responsible sovereign lending and borrowing published by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. Among others, these principles make lenders responsible for making realistic assessments of the sovereign borrower's capacity to service a loan based on the best available information and following objective and agreed technical rules on due diligence and national accounts. Lenders are also made responsible for performing their own ex-ante investigation into and, when applicable, post-disbursement monitoring of the likely effects of the project, including its financial, operational, civil, social, cultural, and environmental implications. This responsibility should be proportional to the technical expertise of the lender and the amount of funds to be lent. It is imperative that we do this, considering that our country has accumulated a substantial external debt burden, for which we are compelled to set aside a substantial portion of our annual budget pursuant to Section 26B, Book 6 of the Revised Administrative Code. In the 2016 national budget alone, 214.5 billion pesos has been allocated for debt servicing. Of this amount, I've been advised, Mr. President, by our partners in civil society that around 3.78 billion will go to interest and principal payments in connection with a number of questionable loan-funded projects, including the Power Sector Development Program, 6th Road to Liahan, Pampanga Development Flood Control, Bohol Irrigation 2, and Angat Water Supply Optimization. Thus, before joining another international financial institution, I strongly urge that the Congressional Oversight Committee on Overseas Development Assistance conduct a debt audit to verify whether the loan agreements our country has entered into are legitimate. Pending the conduct of this audit, the payment of interest on questionable loan-funded projects should be held in abeyance. In addition, before contracting additional sovereign debt, we should ensure that adequate safeguards are in place to protect the Filipino people from irresponsible sovereign lending and borrowing. One of the most important ways this can be done is by finally repealing the provisions in our statutes requiring automatic appropriations for debt servicing. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you too, Senator Ontiveros. Majority Leader? Majority Leader? What's the pleasure of Senator De Lima?
wishes to be recognized, Mr. President.
Salamat po, Mr. President. Just for the record, I just would want to manifest that if I was on time at today's session, if only I made it on or before the start of today's session, I would have voted for the concurrence of this agreement. I don't know if you will consider that in the whole voting, or if not, just for record purposes. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
For the record, Mr. President.
Majority Leader, yes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I would like to acknowledge also the visitors of Senator Legarda, Senior Special Assistant Leo Herrera Lim, Executive Director Evangeline Ong Jimenez Tukrong, Vision Chief John Narag, Director Romel Herrera, Mr. Vicente Clemente, Ms. Christine Lorzano, Ms. Charmaine Ramirez, Mr. Roberto Tan, Mr. John Kenneth Trinidad, Mr. President. Visitors of the Chairman of the Committee
Yes,
on
welcome
Finance.
to the visitors of Senator Legarda.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Message from the House of Representatives. Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 28 November 2016, it designated Representatives Nograles, Fariñas, Zamora, Sandoval II, Cua, Ermita Buhain, Bundok, Umali, and Suarez as conferees to the Bicameral Conference Committee on the disagreeing votes of House Bill number 3408 entitled An Act Appropriating Funds for the Operation of the Government of the Republic of the Philippines from January 1 to December 31, 2017 and for other purposes.
Referred to the Committee on Rules.
Bills on first reading. 1257, an act to protect Filipino pregnant and lactating mothers, infants, and young children during the first 1,000 days of life and appropriating funds therefore, introduced by Senator Ligarda.
To the Committees on Health and Demography, Women, Children, Family Relations and Gender Equality, and Finance.
1258, an act prohibiting the establishment of political dynasties by Senator Ligarda.
To the Committee on Electoral Reforms and People's Participation.
1259, an act establishing a Philippine Space Development Policy and creating the Philippine Space Agency, defining its purpose, appropriating funds therefore, and for other purposes by Senator Ligarda.
To the Committees on Science and Technology and Finance.
1260, an act removing the restrictions in the registration of land titles under sections 118 and 119 of Commonwealth Act number 141 or the Public Land Act as amended on free patents issued under section 44 thereof by Senator Richard Gordon.
To the Committee on Justice and Human Rights.
1261, an act further amending Commonwealth Act number 146 or the Public Service Act as amended by Senator Richard Gordon.
To the Committee on Public Services.
1262, an act increasing the maternity leave of female employees period to 100 days and granting an option to extend for an additional 30 days without pay, amending for the purpose Republic Act number 1161 as amended and for other purposes by Senator Ligarda.
To the Committees on Women, Children, Family Relations and Gender Equality and Civil Service, Government Reorganization and Professional Regulation.
Resolutions. 242, resolution directing the Committee on Labor, Employment and Human Resources Development and other appropriate committees of the Senate to inquire and review in aid of legislation the effect of the proposed pyrotechnics and firecrackers ban by Senator Joel Villanueva.
To the Committees on Labor, Employment and Human Resources Development and Public Order and Dangerous Drugs.
243, resolution directing the Committee on Labor, Employment and Human Resources Development and other appropriate committees of the Senate to inquire and review in aid of legislation the reported presence of alleged illegal Chinese workers in Clark, Pampanga, and other parts of the country, Senator Joel Villanueva.
To the Committees on Labor, Employment and Human Resources Development and Justice and Human Rights.
244, resolution honoring and commending the 2016 Science Awardees of the Philippine Association for the Advancement of Science and Technology by Senator Ligarda.
To the Committee on Rules.
Committee report. Committee report number 13 prepared and submitted jointly by the Committees on Banks, Financial Institutions and Currencies, and Justice and Human Rights on Senate Bill number 1256 with Senators Lacson, Villanueva, Aquino IV, Escudero, and Gordon as authors thereof entitled An Act to Further Amend Republic Act number 9160, otherwise known as the Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2001 as amended and for other purposes, recommending its approval in substitution of Senate Bill number 45, taking into consideration Senate Bill number 1242. Senator Escudero.
To the calendar for ordinary business. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move to transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special order Senate Bill 1256 under Committee Report number 13.
There is a motion to transfer Senate Bill number 1256 from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders. Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we consider Senate Bill 1256 under Committee Report Number 13.
Any objection? There being none, Senate Bill number 1256 is now under consideration.
May we ask the Secretary to read the title of the measure?
Secretary, please do so.
An act to further amend Republic Act number 9160, otherwise known as the Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2001 as amended, and for other purposes.
Mr. President, to sponsor the measure, may I ask that the Chairman of the Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions, and Currencies, Senator Francis Chis Escudero, be recognized.
Any objection? There being none, Senator Escudero is recognized to sponsor the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, distinguished Majority Leader. Our colleagues, magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. As your chairperson of the Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions, and Currencies, I rise to sponsor Committee Report Number 13, which recommends the approval of Senate Bill Number 1256 entitled An Act to Further Amend Republic Act Number 9160, otherwise known as the Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2001 as amended and for other purposes, which is a bill prepared by the Committee in substitution of Senate Bill Number 45, authored by Senator Lacson. This is the result, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, of public hearings conducted jointly with the Committee on Justice and Human Rights on September 19, 2016, as well as on November 22, 2016. As a background, in 2012 and 2013, the AMLA law was further amended by Republic Act numbers 10167 and 10365. The amendments to the AMLA under RA numbers 10167 and 10365 and the remedial measures taken to address the identified strategic deficiencies paved the way for the removal of the Philippines from the FATF's list of vulnerable jurisdictions in June of 2013. The removal, Mr. President, of the Philippines from the said list, however, was subject to the condition that the Asia-Pacific Group, or APG, on money laundering shall monitor the compliance of the Philippines with respect to the enactment of a law, including casino operators as covered persons under the AMLA as amended. As the Philippines failed to enact the casino bill by December 31, 2015, the APG on money laundering in its plenary meeting on September 5 to 8, 2016, decided to give the Philippines until June 2017 to pass the required remedial legislation. Failure to enact the required legislation, Mr. President, within the said period would compel the APG to refer the Philippines to the International Cooperation Review Group, or ICRG, of the FATF for monitoring, which means inclusion in the gray list of the FATF, which could eventually result in the blacklisting of the Philippines. Mr. President, your committee proposes the following amendments with the following salient features. Number 1, the inclusion of casino operators, junket operators, real estate agents, and brokers as covered persons under the AMLA pursuant to the FATF recommendation. Number 2, inclusion of dealers of high-value goods as covered persons under the AMLA, considering that the recent money laundering typologies have shown that high-value items or goods are used to launder proceeds of crimes. Number 3, covered transactions shall now mean transactions in cash exceeding 500,000 pesos. And B, transactions in cash or other equivalent monetary instrument exceeding 500,000 for BSP, SEC, and IC supervised persons, including trust companies, service providers, and casino and junket operators. Number 4, clarifying the requirement of what is a suspicious transaction. That is, one that is based on a reasonable ground to suspect that the proceeds are in any way related to a predicate crime or money laundering offense. Number 5, the use of the term predicate offense to replace the phrase unlawful activity. Predicate offense, Mr. President, is the internationally used terminology referring to unlawful activities from which the crime of money laundering is derived. Number 6, inclusion of the following as new predicate crimes to money laundering. A, other illegal gambling activities under PD 1602. B, violation of Republic Act number 10591, otherwise known as the Comprehensive Firearms and Ammunition Regulation Act. C. Violation of Republic Act Number 10175, otherwise known as the Cybercrime Prevention Act of 2012. D. Violations of Republic Act Number 10697, otherwise known as the Strategic Trade Management Act. E. Violations of Chapter 2, Title 10 of the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997 as amended. F. Falsification of documents under Article 171 and 172 of the RPC. G. Violations of the Republic Act Number 8484, otherwise known as the Access Devices Regulation Act of 1998. H. Violation of RA Number 10173, otherwise known as the Data Privacy Act of 2012. I. Fraudulent acts or omissions and other violations of Republic Act Number 8791, otherwise known as the General Banking Law. J. Fraudulent acts or omissions and other violations of Republic Act Number 7653, otherwise known as the New Central Bank Act as amended. And K. Violations of the Insurance Code of the Philippines as amended. Mr. President, another salient feature would be granting the AMLAC the following powers and duties. A. To file directly before the Court of Appeals a petition for the issuance of a freeze order and application for bank inquiry. B. To issue a subpoena against any person to compel the production of information, documents, data, papers, etc., to give statements under oath. C. To require the submission of cross-border declaration on the physical transport of currency and bearer negotiable instruments. D. To freeze the proceeds of select predicate offenses for a period not exceeding 30 days. E. To inquire into bank accounts and investments without need of a court order in relation to select predicate offenses to the anti-money laundering law. And F. To retain 20% of forfeited assets, but in no case to exceed twice the higher budgetary appropriation for the AMLC in the last 2 years. Number 8. Providing covered persons the authority to temporarily suspend transactions for up to 5 working days, pending verification thereof. Number 9. Clarifying the provisions on the imposition of administrative sanctions by regulatory offices. And number 10, mandating cross-border declaration of currencies and bearer negotiable instruments under AMLA as amended. Mr. President, we would also like to take note that Senator Bam Aquino also filed Senate Bill number 1242, which was taken into consideration in your committee report number 13. I urge, Mr. President, our colleagues to go over the proposed measure so that we can have a healthy debate in order to improve on the measure as proposed by your committee on banks. I submit, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. To give time to the other senators to study the proposed measure, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1256 under Committee Report number 13.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Yes, Mr. President, earlier we voted Senate Resolution 241, the ratification of the AIIB. The Minority Leader wishes to insert into the records his explanation of his vote.
The manifestation is noted.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the Committee on Rules, as early as last week, scheduled a public hearing for purposes of discussing the letter of Assistant Ombudsman Jennifer Hardin Manalili addressed to the Senate President Pimentel, which pertains to the Office of the Ombudsman's decision in OMB CA 150298. It's a case entitled Field Investigation Office versus Emmanuel Joel J. Villanova et al., which was referred to the Committee on Rules last November 14, 2016, for the committee's appropriate action. During the plenary, this representation made a parliamentary inquiry on how the August Chamber will interpret Section 21 of Republic Act number 6770, or the Ombudsman Act, in relation with the dismissal order of the Ombudsman, which reads, officials subject to disciplinary authority, exceptions. The office of the Ombudsman shall have disciplinary authority over all elective and appointed officials of the government and its subdivisions, instrumentalities, and agencies, including members of the cabinet, local government, government-owned or controlled corporations, and their subsidiaries, except over officials who may be removed only by impeachment, or over members of Congress and the judiciary. The provision is actually consistent with Article 6, Section 16 of the Constitution, which empowers the respective Chamber of Congress to discipline its own members, and as mentioned by Senator Franklin Relon, the Senate President Pro Tem. There are also a number of jurisprudence which recognize the lack of authority of the Ombudsman over members of Congress. So with these preliminary questions in mind, we decided to refer the matter to the Senate Legal Counsel for their opinion. Upon the instructions of the Senate Secretary, the Senate Legal Counsel, in its memorandum dated 21 November 2016 of the Secretary, it came out with an opinion and recommendation on the case. I understand that all offices of the senators have also been furnished a copy of this memorandum. So instead of calling for a hearing, your Committee on Rules decided to just present the opinion before this August chamber for its consideration. Now, Mr. President, after a careful and meticulous study on the arguments and accompanying recommendations rendered by the Senate Legal Counsel, as the Chair of the Committee on Rules, may I move that this August chamber adopt the opinion and recommendations by the Senate Legal Office in its entirety. The following, Mr. President, are selected highlights of the opinion of the Senate Legal Counsel. The penalty of dismissal cannot and should not be implemented on both procedural and substantive grounds. Now, since Senator Villanova's filing of motion for reconsideration is within the prescribed 10-day period on procedural grounds, the said decision has not yet become executory and cannot be implemented. Then Section 21 of Republic Act 6770 and Section 2, Rule 3 of the Rules of Procedure of the Office of the Ombudsman are very clear, and there is no room for interpretation, but only for application. Quote, the Office of the Ombudsman has no disciplinary authority over members of Congress. The penalties imposed against Senator Villanova by the Office of the Ombudsman cannot and should not be implemented by the Senate, because the conditions or requirements for the penalty of expulsion of a member of the Senate, as required under Article 6, Section 16(3) of the Constitution and rules of the Senate, are not present. Section 97 of the Rules of the Senate provides, upon the recommendation of the Committee on Ethics and Privileges, the Senate may punish any member for disorderly behavior and, with the concurrence of 2/3 of the entire membership, suspend or expel a member. A penalty of suspension shall not exceed 60 calendar days. Now, Mr. President, can the Office of the Ombudsman compel the Senate and or the Senate President to implement the penalties imposed upon Senator Villanova? It cannot do so, Mr. President. The authority of the Senate to discipline and punish its members is an inherent power. It may not be interfered with, provided the procedure established in the Constitution and its rules are complied with. So with that, Mr. President, I reiterate my motion to adopt the opinion and recommendations rendered by the Senate Legal Office in its entirety.
There is a motion by the Majority Leader as the Chairman of the Committee on Rules concerning the case of Senator Joel Villanueva, for which the Office of the Ombudsman sent a communication to the Senate, that we should adopt the opinion in its entirety of the Senate Legal Counsel. Any objection? There being none, the motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we proceed with the additional reference of business. I'm sorry. Before that, I move for a suspension, Mr. President.
Session is suspended. Birthday yata eh. Break natin yung birthday. I move that we ask.
We ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, there are additional reference of business. I move that we proceed.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved. Secretary, please.
Additional reference of business. Bills on first reading. 1263, an act mandating the automatic release of inmates prisoners and/or detainees as a consequence of period in custody or time served that is equal to or more than the possible maximum imprisonment prescribed for the offense charged, prescribing penalties therefore and for other purposes, by Senator Maria Lourdes Nancy Binay.
To the Committee on Justice and Human Rights.
Mr. President,
Senator Dillon.
yes, I move to adjourn the other sessions.
There is an appeal for silence and attention to what is going on. Mr. Secretary, please continue.
1264, an act expanding special financial assistance and benefits granted to beneficiaries of uniformed personnel of the Philippine National Police, Armed Forces of the Philippines, Bureau of Fire Protection, Bureau of Jail Management and Penology, Philippine Coast Guard, National Bureau of Investigation, and Philippine Drug Enforcement Agency killed or permanently incapacitated while in the performance of his duty or by reason of his office or position, appropriating funds therefore, repealing for the purpose Republic Act number 6963 and for other purposes. Senator Sani Angara.
To the Committees on Civil Service, Government Reorganization and Professional Regulation and Finance. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Tuesday, December 6, 2016.
Any objection? There being none, session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Tuesday, December 6, 2016.